started, and we'll let people continue to join us as they see fit. Again, as I mentioned, today we're talking about making informed lighting choices for your venue, choosing consoles and moving lights and fixtures. This actually is a result of input that we got from previous audiences. The last webinar, we talked about some general concepts in this area, and we got a lot of feedback from people saying that they would like to get additional detail. So we scheduled a follow-up session, hope to go in a little bit deeper. And this session we'd really like to make interactive with the audience. So for those of you who have been here before, you know that there's a chat feature available where you can ask us questions. For those of you who don't know, it should be on the GoToWebinar toolbar. There's a feature called Chat. You can type your messages in there. Basically, I'll be fielding your questions, and as Michael and Andrew were talking about some of the design considerations and how to choose consoles and how to choose moving lights for your venues, I'll be interjecting those questions as they apply to the overall conversation. Then we'll also have a general Q&A at the end that generally runs somewhere around 4:15 to 4:30. We're going to try to keep it as close to an hour as possible. These sessions have had a tendency to run beyond that. Those of you, if we do go beyond that, those of you can stay. Obviously, you're welcome to. Anyone who can't, these are recorded as a podcast. So this session plus all the previous sessions are available at the web address that's showing on your screen right now at creativestagelighting.com/podcast. So feel free to access those at any time. Okay, so a couple of things that we would like to do is just get a little bit better sense of our audience. And as those of you who have attended know, we have what's called the polling feature. So we'd like to get a little bit of feedback from you in terms of who our attendees are. So basically, some of the topics we're going to be covering here, we're looking at what areas are you most interested in. We're looking at things like lighting consoles and controls, moving lights, static fixtures, LED lights, or others. So if everybody could just give us cast your votes, tell us what your interests are. That'll give us a better idea of what types of things that we should be talking about and what areas we're going to address. The other thing to keep in mind, since this is an ongoing series, one of the primary focuses here today was to cover some of the issues regarding consoles and moving lights. So if we do see that there's a vast majority that are interested in other topics, like I noticed that LED lighting is high on everybody's list, I think what we're going to probably do is also come back with a future session that really is focused on LED, because that's such an important topic and seems to have so much interest right now. Okay, so looks like about 73% of you have voted. It's an even split between lighting consoles and moving lights. Looks like about 30% of you are interested in consoles, 30% of you interested in moving lights, 30% in LED. So based on that, we're going to be focused a little bit today, but this gives us a good idea of some areas to come back of for future date as well. Okay. Next question we have is, what type of organization are you a part of? So we're looking at church or house of worship, theater, school, college, university, touring or production company, or other. And I'll give you a few minutes to answer that. I noted that, just in looking at the general attendee list, we seem to have a large contingent from both the school market as well as from churches and house of worship. But it appears today that a lot of you are from touring and production companies. So we'll give you a few more minutes. We're rapidly approaching a 90% vote. Usually when we reach that, that's about where we max out. So, okay. So, as far as the results on that one, we're looking at 4% from churches, 9% from theaters, 22% from schools or universities, 30% 39% from touring or production companies, and 26% other. I'd assume some of those are maybe independents or maybe people that are working in the event marketplace. Okay, what's your current role in your organization? Basically, are you a lighting designer, lighting technician or programmer, purchaser or decision maker, end user, or other? Just to give you a little background on one of the reasons that we also decided to do this as a distributor, working with our resellers and also working with their clients. One of the things that we find is there's a lot of questions in the marketplace about what's enough and what's too much, particularly when it involves lighting consoles and desks or moving lights. We find that people are either oversold or undersold, and what we're trying to do is give you the information you need to try to make the right decisions. Okay, so again, looks like with this poll, about 36% of you are lighting designers, 40% are lighting technicians or programmers, 40% purchaser decision maker, 16% the end user, or 24% other. Again, keep in mind that a lot of people here have multiple roles within their organization. Okay, so that basically gives us a little bit better background on who everybody is. To give you a little bit of an idea, again, as I mentioned, today's webinar, we're looking to be more interactive in nature than we might have been with some in the past. We're also looking to be more focused on specific types of venues, and we also are more product focused, and we may also do a little bit more discussion regarding specific vendors. It's one of the things that we've always tried to avoid in the past because we didn't want to have anybody feel that we were pushing them towards making a decision for one vendor over another. But one of the requests we've got is people looking for more specific information. So I think we're going to try to respond to that with today's session. So again, to give you a little bit of an idea of who we have with us today, for any of you who have attended our last session, you'll know Michael Nevitt. Michael's a veteran of the lighting industry and serves as a product manager here at Creative Stage Lighting. Michael's focused on what we call higher-end technologies, so focused on lighting desks, moving lights, wireless solutions, things of that nature. He has a master's degree in the fine arts, extensive programming background, done work in movies, TV, live event marketplaces, as well as being the product manager for Martin before joining us. Today, as our guest speaker, we're pleased to announce that we have Andrew Dunning with us. Andrew is a well-recognized lighting designer, has his own company called Landrew Design, has a diverse background with lots of experience in a variety of types of lighting projects, including concerts, tours, festivals, special events in churches. We'll have some examples of Michael's work during the course of the webinar, and we're really pleased to have him here with us today. So, some of the questions that we're looking to answer and that you might want to ask yourself are, what are you really looking to achieve in your venue? What does it require? Who's the ultimate customer that you're looking to address? Is it you? If it's a church, are you looking to the pastor? If it's a live event marketplace, what's your client like? What are your plans for future growth? Again, when we go back to that concept of undersold or oversold, are you making the buying decisions today that are going to meet your needs for the next couple of years? Because technology is changing so rapidly in our industry that we want to make sure that what we buy today isn't going to be obsolete next year. And then some other concerns like networking your venue and whether you're going to go green or not green, which again goes back to that whole LED issue. What I'd like to do now is get Michael and Andrew more involved and also get the audience more involved as far as talking to us a little bit about what your questions are. So we're looking at what's your type of production or venue. if you're working within a theater or a church or a school or a club or something of that nature, what are the kind of concerns that you have? What kind of questions are you really looking to have answered here? What kind of budgets are you working with? You know, one of the things that that tends to be a frustration for us sometimes is that people don't have dollars in place, and what happens is at the point they come to us, we'll make recommendations, and then find that you know we're spending or we're recommending things that are much more than they were intending to spend. What's the experience level? And Andrew brought up an interesting point when we were talking about this, and who are the people who are ultimately going to be using this system? It's great to design a state-of-the-art system with all the bells and whistles, but who are the people that are actually going to be running it? You know, if you're in a volunteer environment in a church or a school, are they going to be able to handle the system that you have in place? And then finally, how often do you have the budget to upgrade the system? Again, keeping in mind that the technology is changing so rapidly, are you going to be looking to change in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, longer? I know I go to a lot of our local schools and I see systems that have obviously been in there for long periods of time. Then I go into some of the churches around the country that we get an opportunity to visit with, and everything they have is state-of-the-art and the latest products that are just being introduced. Okay, so at this point, get into a little bit of a discussion about lighting consoles, and what I'd really like to do is, at this point, fade myself into the background, turn it more over to Michael and also Andrew. Let them talk about some of the things in terms of the type of consoles that are out there and the type of environments that you're looking to utilize those in. Okay, so I'll shut up for a while, guys, and why don't you two go ahead and take over.
Well, I'll introduce myself first. I'm Michael Nevitt. I'm really excited to have Andy along with us. Andy and I have go pretty far back. I can't remember, it's too far, but probably in the early 90s, I think I ran into him on a DC Talk tour. It was probably the first time we'd worked together. So
I think he was ironing out some of the beta software with the Hog 2.
Yeah, might have been. Could have been earlier than that. Could have been IntelliBeam controllers. I'm not sure.
It could have been.
Well, there was never any problems with Hog 2 software, you see. That's the short memory everybody has, and I'm not bagging on high end at all. But it's funny now how as we develop new consoles, and maybe there's a crash or a bug, and people look at it like, well, the Hog 2 never had those kind of problems, and it was rocky in the beginning, as Andy will tell you as well. But those days are behind us. We're much more sophisticated, I suppose, in what we're doing now. But anyway, I'm glad that Andy could join us. I was a little surprised to see the breakdown of the percentage of the venues that people work in. Last time we saw a really heavy church contingent, but that's okay. It's all interrelated, as we know. So, and again, I want to reiterate that we're trying to have a little bit more Q&A, because last time there was a lot of questions that came in, but it was non-specific. People would say, well, I really wanted to know what light you would recommend for my school. Well, that's great, but it's almost impossible for us to recommend anything unless you're specific. So hopefully you guys are typing away some very specific questions like, I have a X by X size stage, and I need something that has color mixing and will shoot from 30 feet or whatever. Things like that is helpful for us to be able to answer. So we're going to let Kevin just interrupt as we go along as need be, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. And if you guys don't answer, well, then I guess you get to hear Andy and I yakking for an hour. Kevin, one thing.
Yeah.
Can you advance the slides? I think everybody's still seeing the poll question.
Okay, I'm totally off the poll question here, and okay, are you still?
Maybe it's just me.
No, Andy's saying the same thing, so we'll have to see.
All right, well, we'll dive into it at any rate. But I think we want to start out talking about consoles. Andy, you want to throw any of your thoughts and consoles out just generally?
I think there are probably three ways that I try to break it down most for my folks. One is the entry-level, basic two-scene preset console. Then you'd get into something that would start getting into some moving lights or LEDs at a minimum, and then the consoles that are more focused just at moving lights. I know that there's a higher end of the conventional consoles, but it's not something I deal with a lot.
Well, I guess it really does depend on a lot of factors. I mean, a lot of people say, well, what should I use? Should I use a Roadhog? Should I use a Grand MA? Should I use a Vector? And I think that question is going to have to be answered with a series of 10 or 12 questions back that says, what are you trying to achieve? What's your venue? What kind of lights do you have? What kind of system do you have?
The other variable that we talked about a couple of days ago is, especially in the church market, you'll have one church that'll have multiple sites or multiple rooms on one campus, and so needing a controller that you might have a parent, if you will, and 2 or 3 children that all talk to each other, all talk the same way, at different levels of sophistication becomes pretty important.
Yeah, I have to agree 100% because, as consoles have become more and more complicated, I mean, in my career in 20 years in this business, it's went from nearly you could walk up to any console and start programming to it takes weeks of training even to do the basic things on a lot of these consoles. So, and if you're talking about a church environment where you have volunteers who have to step in and run this, well, I mean, getting them trained up on one console is hard enough, much less several different types. And I think the same thing applies for smaller production companies. You really have production companies like an Upstaging or a PRG or an Epic or whoever, Bandit, that they supply what is specified. But a bigger percentage of the market is smaller production companies who maybe own a console or 2 or 3, and they use it with in-house personnel. And I think that's where Andy's point is very good as well, in that I see so many places that they'll have 4 or 5 different types of consoles. And the staffs are a lot of times not very proficient on any of them, when if they had one console type of various sizes, you could get much better on that one console.
Hey guys, let me just interrupt for 1 second because I'm not getting any response from people. Now, first of all, is your screen clear? Because we got rid of those polling questions.
I see it now. Yeah, types of consoles.
Okay, all right, so we're good there. But from the audience perspective, can everybody see and hear us okay? Because I've only got one set of questions, and now I have Rich saying that he can see and hear fine. Yeah, it seems like most people now are saying that they're good. Okay. So,
okay.
And again, we do have that question opportunity out there. So feel free, as Michael and Andrew are talking, to jump in here and ask your questions as you see fit. Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, I mean, one of the things I would say on this topic of consoles is you do need to choose the console that's appropriate for what you're doing. And what's the questions you want to ask yourself? Well, how many lights are we controlling? Are we controlling dimmers? Are we controlling dimmers and moving lights? Are we controlling, 96 dimmers and 4 moving lights? Then, the smaller consoles are appropriate. I've seen a lot of places where somebody will get a Grand MA and they have 8 lights. I mean, and I'm not saying that's not a bad thing. If your situation is, let's assume you're a church and you're specifying, if your situation is you're going to, in a year you're going to get some more budget, you're going to expand up to 24 lights, and that makes sense to invest in the front end. But as I said I've seen a lot of instances where people spend a lot of money on the front end and end up with very few lights that they're controlling. So you really got to consider that when you're doing it. And now there's so many choices of good consoles out there, so you can choose consoles that's more appropriate to what you were doing. I mean, 10 years ago, you pretty much got a whole hog or a hog 500 maybe an Avolites desk. I would say, Andy, I would ask you a question. If you're, installing a church right now, let's just say an average-sized church. What's your average, church that you're installing right now? How many lights? What type of consoles are you generally putting in, just on average?
Probably going to end up with a dozen and a half moving fixtures of some sort, and maybe 24 conventionals. And then we're probably going to be looking at one of the entry-level hogs, or hearing a lot of requests for Vistas these days.
Okay, guys, one of the questions we have on memory consoles, Norm wants to know, what do you mean scenes do not change from show to show? Can you give us an example of that?
Did you say things that don't change show to show?
He says scenes don't change from show to show. The second statement up there, memory consoles are preferable in venues where the scenes don't change from show to show, such as a theater. Can you give us an example of that?
Oh, it's probably meaning if we're doing a repeated order of cues, where like you've got a run of shows, or a church might do a sermon series where the looks are similar for 4 or 5 weeks.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it also means that you're essentially don't have a lot of moving light capabilities, and if you do have moving lights, you're not moving them around a lot. You're not doing a lot of programming. Whereas you would have to do a lot of pan and tilt presets and that sort of thing. Because a lot of people use moving lights and don't move them very much, just use the color changing portions, they're refocusable specials and that sort of thing. And I think that when you're doing that level of production, you can get away with what I would call traditional theater console. I mean, almost every console is in some form or another capable of running moving lights. But does it have all the bells and whistles that make running moving lights easy is the question. I mean, you can technically run a moving light from anything that will spit out DMX. So,
well, let me argue that a bit, just for sake of discussion. In some situations where you want to take advantage of the technology of the moving lights, but you don't want to see the lights move, some of the higher-end consoles make doing that much easier. Whereas a lower-end, an entry-level console would be basically taking a snapshot of output, and the difficulty level of not seeing the movement gets to be, at least from my perspective, pretty high.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, when you're trying to run a moving lights from a conventional desk, a lot of times, there's hardly any, it's very difficult to mark things or have moving blacks and that sort of thing. So, and especially in a church environment or a small event production, we don't have a lot of time to spend all that time marking the lights so you don't see a move, you just end up seeing a move, and a lot of times it looks a bit sloppy.
Okay. One of the questions here, and I know we haven't quite really gotten to talking about PC-based controllers, but Franco would like to know, how reliable are PC consoles compared to the hardware version? And other than convenience to dedicated buttons, is this something that you would recommend for most users?
I'll jump in on that one. I think PC-based controllers are becoming pretty dependable. One of the reasons is a lot of controllers are now based on things like Windows XP embedded. So the software is essentially built on the same platform. Now, I will say this with an asterisk. I think PCs can be not as dependable as the hardware equivalent, but can be dependable as long as you do not use that PC for everything else, especially surfing the Internet.
I was going to echo that.
Because as soon as you start loading games and other programs on the computer, that's where you get yourself in trouble. If you get a PC, put your lighting software on it and your USB widget or whatever it is that, Ethernet node through ArtNet or whatever talks to your DMX, and that's all that computer's used for. You will be I would say 95% as stable as your counterpart. If you surf the net and you use it for your office computer and all that stuff, then you take your life in your own hands.
If you're trying to run your lighting and do a drawing in Vectorworks and listen to stuff on iTunes, you're headed for a crash.
Right. Yeah. So, and also I'll throw something else out there. A lot of the virus protection software and firewalls and stuff can interfere with talking to your external devices that you want to control DMX from, especially from an Ethernet standpoint. If you're trying to use ArtNet or some other protocol out of a PC to talk to a box, universe box, then you will a lot of times have trouble. So you don't want that thing connected to the Internet so that you don't have to put all that antivirus stuff on there. But that was a good transition into PC-based controllers because I think it's a good point. I mean, would I always rather have a full-blown giant console? Of course. But sometimes you don't have the budget. Oftentimes you don't have the budget. So what I think PC versions are excellent because you get the full power of the console for a budget price. Now, albeit you might have to be clicking with your mouse on buttons that represent the real buttons of the console. But I would take that over going to a real cheap controller that doesn't have the features on it. What's your thoughts on that, Andy?
I would agree. The other thing that the PC-based controllers let you do, especially if they have a counterpart that's hardware-based, is you don't have to be sitting at the console to do a lot of the housekeeping. You have things like patching, setting up palettes. A lot of that kind of stuff can be done offline, away from the venue, saving you a ton of on-site time.
And it is scalable, as you mentioned, the hardware that goes with it. Most manufacturers, or the main ones, have hardware that interfaces via either USB or Ethernet. So you would have a programmer wing or a playback wing or buttons or whatever that goes with it and plugs into the PC. And a lot of the things and stuff we sell, the Vector, Maxis is doing this now, where you start stacking these things up and you start building a console which is essentially almost the same as the one you bought. So that's nice for a smaller production company, a church, a school, because it's scalable. You could buy the PC and widget this year, and the next year budget pick yourself up a programming wing and so on.
Or you can have the PC and a programming wing year-round, and if you do a special event like a church doing a Christmas or Easter event, you can rent the big real thing and gain some speed, but you already know the syntax, you already know the features, so you have a lot more shallow learning curve.
Yeah, I would echo that for sure. You'd mentioned that earlier, Andy, about being able to be scalable. In my opinion, in years of programming moving lights, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said, well, you need consoles that can do effects engines and ones that have the capabilities of doing networking and tracking and stuff like that, and multi-user. But so many platforms do that stuff now, you pretty much get that everywhere. So I think scalability is an important thing now. If you can own, and I'm just going to use the Vector range as an example because it's what I'm selling, but if you own a Green, for example, which is a one-screen, 4-universe console, you can then rent, as you said, a red or a bigger one for that big Easter pageant for 2 weeks. You can load your show that you've already patched everything over. You just have a much larger console which would allow you to program faster. So that's a good thing to consider, in addition to what Andy said earlier about multiple venues having, multiple size consoles in different venues.
Michael, I got an interesting question from Randall. It's one that we deal with all the time in rental and events marketplace. Randall's comment is that he's lost out on more than one tour because they requested a specific desk while he had another desk. Wants to know if we have any sense of why do some people seem to care when it's not them that's running the show. So it's not an out-of-town LD coming in looking for a specific desk. It's Randall's event. He's got a particular kind of console, but but whoever the tour is with or the corporate event is with is looking for a specific desk. Anything in terms of thoughts there, and also any kind of things that someone like that can do to counter that when they're talking to a prospective client?
Well, you've hit on the biggest nerve of any programmer. You know, people want to use what they know, and I always say the greatest thing about, consoles is that once somebody learns it and puts all the investments, it's hard to get them off of it. And, the flip side of that, the hardest thing as part of my job is to getting people to leave a console and move to a different console. That's a hard question because the way you described it is workable. I mean, the scenario a lot of times happens, if a tour's coming in and you're a small event company in a city and you're providing the gear and they request, let's say, an Avo Pearl, because that's what they know. You don't have that. You have a hog, a road hog or something. It depends. If they're going to be running the show, then certainly that's a valid point. They don't know how to run a road hog, then they can't really do their show. If it's a situation where you're going to be programming and they're going to be telling you what to do, which is often what will happen in a fixed venue where, you come in, then I don't think it's such a big deal. And I'll let Andy answer this as well, but if you're just going to be telling somebody what to do, then I usually go with a console that the person that I'm going to be telling knows how to do it, because then I'll move as fast as possible. I mean, assuming that they're going to use a console that I feel comfortable with as being dependable and so forth. But, I can give you a list of 12 consoles now that are all dependable, whereas 5 years ago I could give you a list of maybe 2 or 3. Well, I mean, what's your thought on that, Andy?
Yeah, I would agree. If I'm the LD coming in and I've requested a specific console, it's going to be for a reason. If I am simply coming in giving you direction and I'm not going to be the person programming, I'm much more interested in the person programming than I am in the console. I've seen some incredibly inept people on some great desks, and I've seen some great people on some desks I didn't think too much of, but did some absolutely amazing things. The challenge becomes, and I think I heard this in the question, when a producer who isn't giving direction or doing the programming has spec'd a certain thing, and you're the one who's going to be doing it, I don't know that I've got a good answer for that, because some producers will get in their head, I got to have a grand, or I've got to have a full bore, and it's just because that's what's in their head.
And I don't think there is any one good answer. I think the analogy you used, Andrew, is interesting because, it's like looking at a woodworker and what some people can turn out with just a set of chisels by hand. They'd be masters at what they do, but by the same token, if they had all of the latest tools available to them, how much quicker and better could they do some of the things that they did? And I think the same thing is kind of true with consoles. Somebody gets very used to working with something. They can make it sing and make it do a lot of things that it might not have even been intended to do, but how much more can they do with some of the newer, later technology that tries to simplify things and make it easier? I know for me personally, working with Michael and getting trained on consoles, the fact that a lot of the things now are based on Windows-type software has made it much easier for me to step into things just because it's something that I'm already familiar with. And I think in environments where you have multiple people that are going to be running the console, that can be something that you want to take into consideration is what's the user interface going to be like? How easy is it going to be? Some consoles can get things done, but it's very hard to get them to do what you need them to do. So in a lot of cases, depending upon your venue, I think you want to be looking at things that make that job simpler rather than more complex.
I think that to answer his question, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had between, if I'm understanding the situation right. I mean, if it's a touring company that's coming through and you're providing gear locally, the rider comes in, it says you want a Roadhog full bore. If you don't have that, try to have a conversation with the LD who's coming in. I mean, most LDs are in those kind of situations. When I did that, I always wanted to advance the show, at least have a conversation with the local lighting company about it, rather than letting production do that. And you just have a conversation. Go, hey, are you planning on running this 100%? Because if I go sub-rent, an Avo Pearl, I don't know how to run that. You're on your own. And a lot of LDs will say, well, wait a second. No, I need you to run it. And then if that's the case, then you just say, well, I'm really comfortable on a Roadhog full bore, and can we use that? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, oh, yeah, we'll use what you're comfortable with. So it's a conversation, and there's always that trust between LDs and programmers that need to be developed anyway.
Great. Now we got one of the questions that gets into a little bit more specifics, which is what the audience requested. John wants to know, I currently have 96 dimmers expanding to 192. Also add 18 moving lights, 24 to 36 color changers, and 12 gobo rotators. Right now he has an ETC Express, which won't handle all of this.
Oh, I am so sorry.
But his guys are used to the way ETC programs. What's a good mid-level price choice for a new console, and do you have any specifics on what type of desk? And I'm sure you both have very strong opinions on this.
I'll let Andy go first this time.
Entry level, I would probably be looking at an Element. Mid-level, probably going to be trying to look at one of the Vistas, or I've begun to appreciate more and more lately the MA line. That's probably where I would head. I've had great luck with the Hog stuff as well. And I know that's probably not specific enough, but at least the Hog and the MA, their syntax is going to be similar. The Vista is going to be more of that, the GUI base, the timeline base. So I'd want to be talking to your guys and finding out, are they more comfortable with the timeline idea? Are they more comfortable with, command line, actually, seeing the commands on the screen?
Okay.
Is that answering the question? Am I confusing things?
No,
I think you answered the question. I'll take a stab at it as well. First, I will say, obviously, you've got to make a switch because the Express will not do it. The problem is now you're going from sort of flat, conventional terminology and way of programming to needing to move to moving light way of programming. That's the hardest transition for a lot of people to make. I made it in my church. We had an ETC expression with some moving lights on it, and we made the move. And it was hard for the volunteers to go away from it. But no, once they figured out there were preset buttons and all this effects engine and all these shortcuts where you could just hit a button and the lights would go to the drum and start doing a ballyhoo, they were like blown away. So I would say get some consoles in there and see what you're most comfortable with. But it is a hard transition. I mean, of course, ETC, you want to stay in their realm. They've got the EOS, and they've got the Ion, I think, is the smaller version of that. I mean, the EOS, I'm not going to quote prices because I don't know, but you're getting up there around the $30,000 range or higher. You probably could do what you described with a mid-level console, like a full bore, whole hog full bore, or a Vector Blue, or a Grand MA Light. It also depends on how much you're going to be expanding in the future. That's a pretty good sized rig with a lot of different stuff. And, not knowing your situation, are you going to add more stuff, in particular situations? I didn't catch, was he a church or an event production or a venue or a theater or what, Kevin?
He didn't define it, okay. But we can ask him. So I think that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're still on, shoot back to Kevin what you were there if you were at a church or whatever. But I lean, and I have to say this, I'm a moving light programmer, but I was trained theatrically. I have a master's degree in theater lighting, so I always gravitated towards whole hogs and things like that because it's a moving light desk with all the bells and whistles of a moving light desk, but it's based on sort of theater strand mentality of a cue list. So you can build it across pages in different faders, but you can also build a single cue list and step through it just like you would on an ETC. And I think that people who haven't worked on those moving light consoles are sometimes surprised that it can be worked in very similar ways. And I'm amazed by how many people say to me, "Oh, can you run moving lights on a Hog? Can you run conventional dimmers on a Hog?" Somebody told me you couldn't run dimmers on that. It amazes me.
The other thing that's hard, I think, for a lot of people to grasp is there's this wall up around moving lights or media servers that says that they're too complicated to run. And if you started looking at them instead of as this complicated little robot thing, and more of just another light, just like a park hand's just another light, it just has more features to it. So like a VL5 and a Lico are going to be similar in that they both have intensity. It's just the VL5 will move and change color. And once that hit for me, it changed the way I program. Because it took for me a lot of complication out of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I look at it the opposite. I often tell people a conventional light is a moving light that doesn't move and has one parameter, intensity.
So it's the same way of looking at it, just the opposite direction.
Right, yeah. So it's not something, none of this is anything to be intimidated by. The big difference is when you go from running a big conventional rig with a few moving lights to running an equal conventional moving lights or your show becomes more moving light than it is conventional, then you need tools that these moving light controllers give you. And like I said, they all pretty much offer very similar things now. Vista, Hog, Vector, Grandame, Avo, whatever. They all have presets, they all have effects engines, they all have these tools. But you definitely want a console that's going to have preset buttons, that's going to have effects engines in it, that's going to have easy access to the parameters through, parameter encoders and things like that. The days of where we used to take an ETC console, and I'm not slamming on ETC, but, where we had scrollers and you knew that 25% was blue and 29% was green and 36 was purple. Those days are not possible anymore with a 24-channel moving light.
So John, who asked I'm sorry, guys.
No, go ahead.
John, who asked the previous question, clarified. He said, number one, he's with a theater. Number two, right now he only has the ETC desk and the 96 dimmers. He's adding in the rest of those dimmers, channels, and the moving lights.
Well, I would definitely, recommend, John, that you do put a new controller in your package. I mean, you almost have to, and broaden your horizons. I mean, the economy is not great right now, so you have a lot of options in looking at different controllers and getting demos from people. And I don't know what's your time frame, but if you're going to LDI, that's a great opportunity to go there and see everything that everybody has, and get in-depth demos and that sort of thing. But I would, be open. Don't say, well, we only know ETC, so we're going to stay there. Especially if you're at a college theater, you definitely want to be teaching the students the new technologies that's out there, and that's moving light controllers. I do think, Kevin, that we should sort of move on to moving lights now.
Sure.
And see if there's any questions, unless you have more questions, because we'll just keep talking.
Yeah, well, the one thing here is just talking again about back along the lines of TC-based expandable systems. What are some of the good choices to evaluate? Again, I know you probably each have your own specific interests here, but any ones that you're more comfortable with than others?
Well, I would evaluate them all because they all can be downloaded for free online and installed on your computer, and you play with them. you know. So I would definitely say, you know, look at Hog, look at Vista, look at Grand MA, look at Maxis, look at Vector. You know, I don't know about EOS and whether they have a PC version that's free. I don't know.
Okay. All right, good enough. So was there anything specific that you wanted to cover when we're talking about, you know, I know with Andrew's focus, particularly in the church market, any particular issues you look at there, you know, and I understand part of that is going to be due to the size of the venue that you're working with, Andrew, but, you know, what are the considerations that you take when you're making a recommendation to a church or a school or a theater about what they should be looking at in you know, their choice of a desk?
I try to figure out what the end result is, you know, what the desired bottom line is. Some of them will come to the table and say, I've got to have moving lights. Some of them will come to the table and say, you'll never put moving lights in my church as long as I'm alive. But I try to figure out, okay, what's the result that they want? How can I best serve them?
Okay.
And it's, you know, I try to figure out the personality of the organization, try to figure out the personality of the leadership. And I know it's not necessarily lighting stuff, but that's, for me, that's key.
Okay. You know, I know we had talked briefly about, you know, looking at the end users and who are the operators actually going to be. So you've got two issues there. You've got, you know, obviously the who's going to be doing the programming on the front end, but does the person who's actually going to be running the desk kind of slant your thinking in terms of what you decide to do?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You know, how easy is it not only to run, but I also have to ask a lot, how easy is it or difficult is it to teach? You know, is it something that a volunteer who sees the thing once a week can still be comfortable with only seeing it for an hour a week?
Right. You know, and I know that's one of the things that, you know, we have a lot of dealers that do installs, and that's one of the things they're always struggling with is, you know, a desk that's powerful enough to get the job done, but simple enough for somebody to come in on a Sunday and run the show. So that's kind of an ongoing struggle. Michael, do you have any other insights? You know, I don't know, you know, types of applications that you might have worked in where you've really had to deal with both ends of that spectrum?
Well, yeah, the church is as Andy said, you know, there's the head pastor generally dictates. He's, you know, if you want to say to a non-religious environment, he's the artistic director, you know, or the executive producer. So, you know, so a lot of churches don't want to have any part of Hayes. The church I belong to, which is about 2,500 seat, you know, sanctuary, they're fine with Hayes, and you know, they don't even care if we don't turn it off during the message. So they like that look, and you know, so that works well. Theater, you know, it just depends on the type of productions you're doing in there. You know, I worked with a college theater recently that was looking at putting in some moving lights in the console, and you know, the professor there who'd been there a long time said, well, you know, we just want them to be refocusable specials. We don't ever want to see these lights move because that's not what we do. We do theater here. So I'm saying, okay, that's fine. So they were, and this is talking about moving lights a little bit, but they said, you know, we want VO1000s or something like that. I said, okay, well, that's great. So when you're doing 4 productions a year in here, what happens when the theater is not being used for theater? Well, they'll bring in concerts, or the choir will come in, or they do whatever, musical act by fraternities or where. I said, well, what about those people? Couldn't they use some moving lights? Well, yeah, I guess so. So you got to look at all the different ways, although the theater department may only intend that using them as refocusable specials, and I can, for one thing, guarantee you when the young students get the hold of the moving lights, they won't just be refocusable specials. That might be what the professor has envisioned, but when the kids get a hold of them, they'll be flashing and swinging around, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
But, you know, so you got to really analyze what it is and get as much information about what you're trying to do. Drives me nuts when I walk into theaters and schools and whatever where, you know, an architect has dusted off a plan that they've done 27 times before, like it's a cookie cutter. And nothing is a cookie cutter to me. Everything has specifics and what they're trying to do, and very, subtle nuances of how things are different. Luckily, we have so many choices now. You can adjust for your console, for your lights, and so forth. 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have many choices. You didn't really have a choice. But now there's so many different lights. If you go to LDI now, it's all about, well, this light has feature A, B, C, and D, and this light has features this and that. Whereas it used to be, it was all flash and trash, rock show at LDI. Now it's all about individual features because there's so many different types and there's so many nuances in how they all work.
Okay.
So you got to look at it. I mean,
okay, as you said, let's why don't we, unless anybody has anything specific about consoles, I think we've covered that pretty thoroughly. We can always come back and answer some more things at the end, but why don't we move on to the moving lights portion, get into a little bit of that, because I think we've got some really interesting examples there in terms of some actual design examples. So let's start looking there. The role of the moving light today. As we see from some of the questions, there's more and more venues that are moving lights into their more traditional rigs and expanding capabilities. It's one of the things that's driving the growth of the console market because people need to expand that capability as well. But why don't we just talk a little bit here about what kind of considerations when you're looking at a venue, when you're talking to people, what kinds of questions are you asking them? What kind of information are you looking to get in terms of feedback for their moving light needs?
I'll jump in. Even before I start looking at the 1,006 features that a given light might have, a big consideration for me is who is local to a given venue, whether it's a church or a theater, who can get them service quickly.
Okay.
And I know that's maybe looking at the question an opposite way, but if a church or a theater buys, a dozen $8,000 fixtures, but their vendor is 10 hours away, and they need help, they need to get more of the same, it may or may not be a good solution for them. A better solution might be something with a little bit fewer features, but where they can get service and more of the same quicker.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, one of the things that we run into a lot, and I think we see some of the moving light vendors really pushing that upper end of the marketplace with things that have so many bells and whistles that they're great in the really large tour environment that have big budgets and can afford to put those things in. But with the audience that we're generally talking with, whether it's our own dealers or our dealers' customers, the churches and schools and theaters, most of those things are, number one, way outside of their price range. Number two, a lot more complex than they would ever want to have to get involved with, and just way outside of where their needs and their budget are. Michael, anything that you've got that you want to add on that?
You've got 2 points. You've got a practical consideration, and that's things like how far are my lights from where I'm shooting? What is their purpose? You're talking wash lights. Well, don't forget, moving lights are great, but you use the same formulas that you used when you were learning in school how to lay out a wash with your Fresnels. You've got to cover the stage, and you cover the areas you're lighting with your wash lights. First and foremost, lighting has to illuminate, and I don't care if you're doing a theater or a church or a rock concert or whatever. If you don't see the star, which might be Joel Osteen, or it might be Madonna, you're not you're getting fired or whatever. So
right.
So that's first and foremost. So pick a moving light that does what you need it to do and not necessarily more. I mean, if you have a low ceiling, you don't need a Shogun, or a Mach 3. You might be able to just get away with a Mach 250 or a VL 2500 or whatever it's appropriate, And, you know, all those specifications are well documented, so you should be able to figure out how to cover your stage well. Then, you know, then you start putting on, you know, bells and whistles above that.
And I would agree 100% with what you're saying in terms of the function. My concern is that I run into a lot of buyers who they've read in a magazine, I got to have X, and their local vendor doesn't have it. So even before they start asking the practicality question of what is best for my space, they've jumped ahead to not even looking at who's around them, who can help them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Michael, I've got the slide up here regarding your latest show with Lincoln in Indiana. It might be good because I think it's a sized venue that a lot of people can relate to. And, you know, maybe if you could talk a little bit there about some of the considerations that you had, you know, give a little bit of a background on the show, but then maybe give a little background then on why you chose what you did and the way you chose to light the show.
All right. Well, first, I was the projection and lighting designer on the show, outdoor amphitheater. The width of what you're seeing in that photograph is about 50 to 55 feet, and the trim of the lights were about 30 feet. So, you know, it's maybe even a little higher. There was a full grid roof above this outdoor amphitheater, set about 1,500 people. So pretty big space, and it was amazing. Before we put the set in there, that the whole venue is about 100 feet wide. So, you know, we had to bring it down to even be able to afford to do the show. I ended up using the new JB Lighting A7s, which is a product that we have that I'm the product manager for. Originally had spec'd Max 700s for the job, which were a borderline light for the distance, but I had a power constraint, and we only had a 200 amp company switch in this, and so we had a full dimmer system built in with conventionals, but we only had 200 amps for the moving package. So I put 700s on it, and then I started considering maybe I should switch them. So I was able to switch to the A7 LED light, get twice as many lights for the same power usage, and you know, those things, if you put them right next to a Max 700, they're just as bright. So we were able to do that. Then I had 28 of those, used them as side lights as well, on, you know, standard theatrical sidearms because they're so lightweight. And also I sprinkled in 18 Mac 2Ks, mostly Mac 2Ks because it's what I could get cheap in the rental package. Would have loved to have something else that had more bells and whistles, but you know, you got to work on a budget. So we were able to do a lot of great things. It was programmed on a vector red console and then played back on a vector green console and ran from the 1st of June till August 16th. Programmer was Joel Young, so it was a good time. Really nice show about Abe Lincoln and his boyhood in Indiana, and you know, because it's Abe Lincoln's 200th birthday this year. And I'm a bit of a history geek and watch the History Channel a lot, so for me it was a great project to work on. But it was very nice. Also along the back wall you see there we use stage bars. My intention was to make it kind of stripes of light, and I wasn't looking for this, you know, clean psych light. I was looking for something that would be more of an accent on the wall. So, but the you know, it was a big production with a lot of space. I pushed the lights and their brightness to the limit with the throw I had on them, but it worked out really good.
But it's a nice example of something you've done with moving lights that doesn't scream out moving lights. You did a good job of using the subtlety, using the function of the things without it screaming out, I'm a pop show.
Right. Well, yeah. And it wasn't a musical. It was a straight play with some music in it. But, you know, the director of the show didn't want, you know, wasn't a moving light appropriate show, but I used moving lights because I could get the most bang for the smallest amount. Now, we also had 300 conventional fixtures up there, too, but, you know, that was just used as fill-in stuff. Front area light, two-color down wash, some side light wash, and some, you know, kickers and things like that. So But, I'd say 80% of the show was lit with moving lights. And there was a gazillion specials in the show, and it was, great to do the refocusable special thing. Hey, Joel, grab that light and put it over there because the director moved, young Abe, 10 feet over, and we need to light him. And when you're doing a show this complex with fog and pyro and very short period in which to mount it, the moving lights became essential to the package. Plus, it just adds a level of spectacle, even if you don't have the lights moving around, if people see lights changing color and that sort of thing.
Okay. We've got some examples here of some of Andrew's designs. Now, Andrew, this is one of your churches that you've designed?
This is actually a showcase for country radio.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you want to talk a little bit about, some of your considerations there. And, I think one of the things that the audience is asking about a lot is the use of moving lights in lieu of traditional fixtures. And I think Andrew's comment about the way that Michael was using the moving lights in a kind of inconspicuous manner, I think the majority of our audience isn't dealing with rock and roll. They're more dealing with theaters and churches and things of that nature. And I think that's an important consideration to talk about is, movers don't have to be the in-your-face audience blinder kind of things. They can do a lot of really nice, subtle effects. And, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Did you grab any of the church pictures, or is this the only one?
No, there's another one coming up right after it. If you want to jump to that one, I believe this is one of your. This is a larger church venue here.
Yeah,
correct?
This is a church, about a 3,000-seat room, and we used moving lights here to really immerse the audience in the environment. Like a lot of theater, you try to break that imaginary fourth wall and really make the audience part of the experience. So things like putting the foliage pattern up on the wall using X spots, bathing the audience in a blue. I think those are probably Mac 2K washes, really to make them part of what's going on stage in addition to the usual stage lights. And this is one, where I talk about not wanting to see the lights move. You don't necessarily want to see the leaves rolling into place on the walls. You just want them to fade in and the audience be in the middle of a forest suddenly.
Okay.
Another thing I think a lot of these things you almost have to consider now is the mixed media element of almost everything, even theater now. I mean, certainly every church that has a budget to have a moving light has an IMAX screen, probably has a big screen in the back with content of whatever's going on.
Kevin,
So
would you go back a screen?
Oh, sure.
You definitely have to start considering things like video lighting and stuff, even if you're in the theater. If you're going to have a camera on somebody, you'd better make the money person look good. And so that is where, you've got to have a mixture, I think, still of incandescent and moving light arc sources and LED sources. I mean, I have not moved to the point where I do a lot of front lighting with moving lights. I don't like corrected arc light for front lights. There are some moving lights that do it well, VL1000s, Mac TW1s, VL5s, because they're an incandescent source. But I'm still of the old school that I wash my stage front wash with traditional Lecos. If I've got the budget, or maybe PARs, but if I got the budget, I'd love to have something like a VL1000 at the front light so that I can isolate down on a special on somebody. But generally, most of my movers are on the floor, or side light, or backlight.
You mentioned media servers, Michael. This particular shot, it's your basic, real simple concert kind of look for a showcase. But I had basically a budget to get 3 regular 6x9 screens, and that was it. So we hung them vertically, and I believe those are being lit with DL2s being driven by a single catalyst server. So as my artists changed in the evening, I think I had 6 or 8 artists in one evening, we could put a different graphic behind them, so giving each one a different personality.
I mean, that's the thing. We're living in a multimedia world visually. It's kind of depressing now because you cannot go see anything on television or live that doesn't have some kind of big video or LED look behind it. And I think we'll shake out of that. It's like the days when moving lights first started. You wiggled them around, everybody oohed and awed, and they thought it was great. Well, that lasted for 5 years, and then you had to actually be creative again. And I think people are oohing and ahhing about video and LED. In another few years, that'll settle down and it'll find its place. So, but right now it's a bit of an overkill. The technology is coming out so fast. But my point in all this is that more and more of this is being controlled with the lighting, and therefore it's more of an issue with having a console that can handle triggering these things or interfacing with a media server. A lot of consoles now are starting to integrate media servers and the consoles together. I know Vector, which we're working with, you can hook it up to an Archaeos or a Catalyst or a Hippo, and you can see the thumbnails on the consoles as if they were pictures of gobos, which I think is great because it treats the media server to what I think it should be, which is another fixture of your show. Yeah. So you think of the images in a media server as gobos or whatever. That's a good way, I think, to think about it, at least when you're programming your lighting control.
Yeah, you're talking about where things have gone. This particular show is probably 3 or 4 years ago when media servers were just starting to pop. We controlled the entire show on, I think it was an old Hog 2. And I had guest LDs throughout the week, throughout the evening, and when they came in and were able to see the Catalyst, see the DL2s as just another lighting fixture, like you said, Michael, it really opened up things for them. Made their shows look better because they weren't thinking, oh boy, this has 8,000 parameters. It's just another light.
And breaking away from just a question here, breaking away a little bit from the moving lights, but Ron does all musical theater, about 6 productions a season, and he says he's looking at sea changers right now as an actual cost savings product. He's saying that, his feeling is a sea changer can reduce the number of fixtures for the same space, and he just wants to know, what your feeling on that is, true or no.
Well, I will take that because I have 50 of them in my church. And when I refer to my church, I just mean the church that I attend and spend a lot of time lighting without, of course, getting paid.
So it's not the First Church of Michael?
No, it's not. It's the church that I just went and did some training last night on the volunteers, trying to get volunteers to understand color temperature and when to put a front light on the pastor and when not to. But we have quite a few sea changers there. They're fine. Would I rather have a moving light? Yes. One thing I will recommend on the sea changer, keep in mind that you're going through a bunch of dichroic glass. So absolutely, positively, if it's a source 4, get a 750 bulb in there because a 575 will not work. It's just you don't get hardly any lights in any sort of colors. And it will be a lot less output than you're used to of sticking a blue gel in front of it because of the glass you've got to go through. Now, the flip side of that is you can crossfade from one color to the other. We have some older ones. We tend to have to reset them quite a bit, but the sea changer people tell us that it's just the newer versions are better for that. But on a budget, yes, they're not bad. Would I take them over color changers, scrollers? Absolutely.
Okay. And Kevin, not me, Kevin, but another Kevin, wants to know if looking for an even wash, and I think he was looking at your backdrop there on the Lincoln show, Michael.
You want to go back to that slide?
What kind of formula do you come up with to give you a nice even wash, and what kind of spacing do you use on your fixtures? And, I said to him offline, part of that's going to have to do with with beam angle and things of that nature. But is there a formula that you use to determine the number of fixtures and the spacing?
Well, I do it. I use WYSIWYG primarily for drafting, so I tend to do it in WYSIWYG. But I'm also kind of old school. When I'm doing a plot, I get out a piece of paper and I find out what the beam throw is on the light, and I get out my protractor and I draw the cone. And so it's fixture by fixture. Once you do it a lot, you get more of a sense of what a Mach 700's throw is going to be. Now, of course, having zoom capabilities is a godsend, because your margin for error is greater. That way you can shoot kind of straight down and get one, or you can go a little further downstage and zoom it in and get the same kind of spread. But you definitely, I think there's too many designers, quote, in the world who just go, okay, let me put every 4 feet, I'm going to put a wash light, and between each one that I'm going to put a hard edge light, and my programmer will figure it out on site. It's kind of dangerous to make your programmer have to do that, because if you don't give them enough lights to do it, then you just can't wash the stage.
Well, in asking the question about how to make a good wash, whether it's a conventional fixture or a moving light, I tend to use a 30 to 40% overlap. So if I have an area, there might be a fixture that lights just that area, but the one on either side of it will come into that area 30 or 40%. That lets me, and again, whether it's a moving light or a conventional, it's the formula that I use. You use a protractor and paper, I might do it on screen, but it's the same thing.
Okay. Now, Kevin clarifies and says, he was talking about LEDs in particular, and the LEDs in general, and the stage bars in particular, and I guess looking at the considerations there. So I'm not sure that the WYSIWYG part of it. Is there any other formulas that you use in order to answer that question? Michael?
Oh, hold on. I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I feel like I'm on the cell phone commercial. Can you hear me now?
I know. You're the Verizon guy.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't get that. I guess I'm on wireless connected through, so you're going to have to repeat. I'm sorry.
Okay. Kevin clarified a little bit more on that question about the wash, and he said, could you give an example of a 16 to 20-foot throw and the standard beam angle on a stage bar? He's looking at, I guess, a little bit more general terms as far as LEDs against the backdrop.
Okay. Well, stage bars probably. Do you have the capability to go back to one of those Lincoln slides, maybe the orange?
Yeah,
one?
sure.
I think a stage bar is probably a poor example, because you wouldn't wash. The stage bar is not a stage wash. Maybe the one that's the other slide there, Kevin, the orange.
Sure, I'll go back one.
Because the stage bar is generally meant for two purposes: lighting a surface like I'm doing, or it's more of a cyclic kind of fixture. Some people do use it as kind of audience blinders as well. But you wouldn't put it at 16 feet and light a stage, because I think it would be so broad you wouldn't get it. But taking an example of the A7s, for example, what I used, and now you're gonna off the top of my head, what he said, 16 feet high.
16 to 25.
Okay, well that's pretty broad range. 16 is way different. But let's just pick in the middle. Let's say 20. That's ideal. I think an ideal throw distance for that LED fixture. Its zoom range is somewhere between 8 and 28 degrees. So you're going to be able to be pretty spotty. So let's just, when you're figuring out the angles of a wash light that zooms, you kind of want to use the middle ground. So let's say, roughly, 16 degrees, 18 degrees. So from that range, I don't know, I would say from that lower range, you're going to probably need a light every 5 to 6 feet across.
Okay.
To get yourself a nice stage wash. Now that depends on your positions and how, is your angle nearly straight down, or do you have, an angle? So for example, a lot of times you'll have one truss that's upstage, and from that you've got to hit the upstage and the downstage, 2 rows of wash light. what I like to do a lot of times, and a lot of times I'll do this for budget, where I have to be a little thin on the mover wash lights, I'll go ahead and put a 2-color conventional wash in, 2 or 3 color conventional wash. And that's what I did in Lincoln. I put an amber and a blue conventional wash with par cans in. I had the units, I had the dimmers. It didn't cost me anything but a little gel. And that's a safety. If I end up, wanting to go between a scene where I want a blue glow or something in a transition, then I can save my moving lights and mark them from something else. So I like the combination of the two.
Okay. All right. We move forward again here and see what other considerations. Any additional questions, regarding any of the applications that Andrew's shown here or that Michael's put up? Otherwise, we'll get into some specifics about, how do you decide on moving lights? Okay. All right. So basically, when you're deciding for moving lights, there's a variety of questions that you need to ask yourself or your client. Why don't you guys, maybe take it from that perspective a little bit and talk a little bit about, what types of considerations, the difference between a 250 and a 575 and a 700 and a 1200. These things are all being pushed at people left and right. What kind of questions are you asking to get feedback from the client, and how are you making decisions about what lights you're going to use in which specific kind of application? Are there any general rules of thumb that you can cite for people?
I'll give that one to Andy to start with.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm so generous.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. First question I got to know is budget. If we need to provide wash lights, knowing where their budget is drives where my thinking goes. Beyond the availability, dependability, and all that I talked about earlier. Because if they've got $5,000, but they're trying to light a 40 by 30 stage, it very quickly helps me make some decisions about are moving lights do they even make sense?
I'd say turn on the house lights at that point.
Yeah. But you see, it helps me to know where to put my efforts. Whereas if they say we've got a 20 by 30 stage and you've got 10 grand, okay, we can go from there. And it just goes in chunks like that.
Michael, any viewpoints you have on that?
Well, I think that we've hit on a number of these situations here. I mean, I think the most important thing for me is to overall know what type of environment you're working with. Some of it is obvious. If you're going into a theater or church, you've got your limitations of what you're going to do. If you're trying to light a club, and we've not really addressed clubs much here, then, what's your idea? Are you trying to light people, or are you trying to create effect? We're mostly have been sticking with the lighting the stage. So, and if you read through some of these points here, I think they're good. Know who your client is. If you're being hired by a church, your client is the pastor. If you're being hired by a theater, it's probably the director of the show, artistic director. If it's a concert, it's the rock star or the guitar player's wife or whoever. It has the ability to fire you. So, and then things like knowing what your audience is. If you're doing a church, you might have a more conservative audience. If you're doing a theater, theaters tend to tolerate pretty much throw at them. But you need to know. Also, this type of show you're doing. If it's going to be a concert, are you going to be a single cue list kind of thing where you're programming it, where you're hitting go, 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 because it's Britney Spears and it's done to a track and so forth? Or is it, the Grateful Dead, where you never know what song they're going to do next, and you're just going to busk the whole time? So
I will say, backing up to something that you said, sorry to interrupt.
Nope, it's good.
Probably one of the biggest mistakes that I have made is by making those assumptions without actually talking to the client.
I don't think you can ever talk. I guess you can talk too much, but a lot of conversation is important.
But using the example of a church, I've got one client in particular who is a church who called, and I made some assumptions about churches being conservative. And I had a pretty steep learning curve in changing my thinking and how different people do church. And the same thing with some pop stars. I've made some assumptions that, hey, this is a pop star. They want to see things wiggle for 4 hours. And that wasn't necessarily true in that case.
I think with the church market in particular, it's changing so dramatically, and it really depends. There seems to be so many variations there. There are regional variations based on the part of the country. There are denominational variations. There's the size of the venue itself. So it's one of those things where I think there may have been things in the past that we thought were pretty pat answers to questions there, and they've just changed because that venue's because those venues are so dramatically different, and they're so driven by the leadership of that particular congregation making the decisions about conservative or more rock-oriented kind of things.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Okay. Okay. Any other things here that you guys want to address in terms of some of the other types of questions that people might be asking? And also, before we move on, any more questions from the audience about making decisions about moving lights or how to decide on what movers you might be considering?
I think we've gotten some good questions so far. I'd love to answer a few more if people are still out there to ask. But I think, one of the feedbacks we got from the previous one is more specific about what type of fixtures we recommend or whatever, which is actually a good transition to this. And I think we've reached a point that, for the most part, most of the main manufacturers that you've heard of are safe to buy. I mean, they're all good now, and they're pretty dependable, and the production facilities are nice. I mean, if you're talking about Martin or Verilight or Elation or Comar or Claypaky, they're all pretty good products, and they're all pretty dependable. So then you really get into bells and whistles and features. If you take the slide we're looking at and you say 250, 575, 700, 1200, which one do I need? It's all really photometrics. It's going to depend on mostly what your throw distance is and what brightness you need. And with the bigger ones, the brighter ones tend to come more bells and whistles, like color mixing, like animation wheels and things like that, but they also cost more. So you want to find the fixture that will work for your distance and will be bright enough for what you're trying to do. And remember, don't believe the photometric and the lumens data on all the manufacturer's sheets.
It's optimistic.
Yes, it is. It's in a vacuum in the best possible situation with the cleanest light that just came off the assembly line and everything. So I'm a firm believer that you get a product and you look at it and you demo it and you try to compare them side by side if you can, and you get the product that you think is. If you don't have experience in figuring out lumens and frame spreads and everything, call your local distributor or call Ozzy Creative or call the manufacturer and, tell them what you're trying to do, what you're trying to throw, and people will almost always be glad to recommend something that is right for that purpose.
Kevin brings up another interesting issue, and one of the things that I know you had to deal with on your recent Lincoln gig, and that a lot of people have to deal with based on the venue. And he says, one of the considerations that he has to always keep in mind is the power available. As you're moving towards the larger fixtures, you're basically always looking at 208. So that has to be a consideration. And also when you're moving into some of the really smaller venues, a ballroom or a smaller club or even some of the smaller churches, I think power is one of the things that a lot of people have to keep in mind when they're looking to make the decisions they're making.
Well, not only is it important as far as how much you have and how much it would cost to get more, but power is expensive these days, especially you get places like California and Texas. Power, per kilowatt hour is expensive. One of the places that this really comes to a head is on a cruise ship. cruise ships are trying to go LED left and right and use the smaller fixtures because on a cruise ship, there is no power. You're generating all the power by, burning fuel to make that power when you're running the engine. So, every bit of power that you don't use saves them a lot of money in oil running the engines. So things like this, the light that's pictured at the bottom of this slide, which is the one we're selling, the JB A7, uses about 325 watts at 110, weighs about 700 pounds. But if you stick it next to a 700-watt wash light, it's pretty comparable.
Yeah,
and, with half the power.
Did you just say that JB weighs 700 pounds?
Yeah, he wanted how about 17? It's the 700-pound gorilla.
If you put it in a 600 and something pound flight case.
Yeah. There you go. It's a 17-pound fixture with the output comparable to a Max 700. I think we just kind of rolled that all together.
Yeah, I kind of blurred it all together. But yeah, I was thinking of a much larger light. I think there are some lights that in this industry that weigh 700 pounds.
Oh man, they're getting there. They're getting there rapidly. I've had to try to put some of them up in rigs at trade shows, and it's not fun. So. Yeah, but I think that the whole move to LED, and I think one of the things that we're seeing is we're going to run out of time today to really get into an in-depth conversation of LED and design. But that gives us a really good topic to come back for future. But one of the things that we're seeing in a lot of places is with the whole effort to go green, conserve energy, reduce heat output, just a variety of things. But in my market, I deal a lot with people in Hawaii, California, states of Washington and Oregon, and the whole Go Green movement is so major there. So it's definitely a consideration, and one of the things that causes some considerable expense if you run if you've got a permanent install and you're running a venue on a regular basis. LED is a great way to go, whether you're talking the moving lights or you're talking about your traditional fixtures, and the state of the technology in terms of the output and the brightness of the fixtures is just improving all the time, and the price is coming down. So it's actually making it that the fixtures themselves are becoming a lot more affordable.
Well, one thing I will say on LEDs, and I'll end my statement here, but we finally reached the threshold, I think, with the A7 VLX, which is Very Light's new LED coming out, where now these lights are not just gags, if you will. Think, little LEDs that light a little wall section or whatever. The A7 and the VLX and impression simulation, those lights can actually substitute for a wash light finally. And I'm sure it's just a matter of time before somebody figures out how to make a hard edge version of a source of LED. So, we finally have reached the cusp where I can substitute a conventional 700 watt or soon to be 1200 watt with an LED, and that's really our future. There's no way around it.
Okay. Ron has a question. Just talking about LED moving washes. Are they so new that they're too expensive, or are they going to change and have more features soon? Our personal preference is the A7, but I think it really talks well to some of Ron's issues. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about that, or do you want me to?
Well, I don't. Actually, the LEDs seem to tend to be cheaper now because LEDs are becoming cheaper and cheaper to manufacture, and even if they're the same price when you buy it, you really have to consider your lifespan of the unit. Most LEDs are rated around 50,000 hours. Now, LEDs degrade over time, so they get less and less bright as their lifespan goes, so they don't just burn out in an instant like a traditional bulb would. But if you think in terms of getting 50,000 hours out of your fixture, or 800 or whatever your rating of your bulb is, and then having to replace that bulb with a $200 bulb every time, that starts to add up. Plus, you figure in the power consumption, in less power consumption, things like that. You have a rig of 100 moving lights up there that are LED compared to conventional. You're going to save a lot of money over the life of those lights.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, you do have an expense range in those fixtures. There are things at the upper end of that market, like the Verilight VLX and some of the high-end products like the Studio Picks that may be outside the price point of most people's affordability. But when you look at some of the other things at the other end of the market, if we talk about, as a for instance, the A7, you're talking about a fixture that is side-by-side comparison as bright as a Mac 700, weighs about a third as much, and actually is priced at about half the price of a 700. And definitely within the price affordability of most venues. We're looking at a fixture that's highly affordable, as are some of the Elation fixtures and others. So I think you've got a range in that marketplace, but you've got a lot of things that that you need to take into consideration. Okay, Andrew, you have anything to add there before we start to wrap up here?
Nope. Y'all doing great.
Okay, good enough. All right, so
we appreciate that.
Yeah, as we always do, we try to talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available there out to you. And Andrew, I know you had some definite opinions on additional places people should go to get more information. I'm just going to touch base on a few things here, but feel free to add in wherever you want to. For those of you who have attended previous and heard presentations by Richard Cadena and others, you know that both Amazon.com and the PLSN bookshelf are excellent sources to come up with a wide variety of books that are available on automated lighting design, the use of moving lights, and in specific types of venues. For instance, Richard has the lighting design for houses of worship. So if you do have specific kinds of needs, there are books out there that are targeted that'll help you answer a lot of your questions, and also be able to push you in the right direction in terms of other places to go. There's a lot of website resources out there. One of the things that we make available on our site are the whole series of web events recorded as podcasts. So you can go back to any of those and download those, view them on your computer or your iPod at any time. You've also got a lot of excellent sites out there like Light Network, Control Booth, iSquint, Swami Candela, which is Richard's site, PLSN, and others. So anything that we weren't able to answer, first of all, feel free to drop us emails, and we'll be glad to get back to you to respond to those more directly. But also utilize the web resources that are available to you out there as well. Some of the other things that you can take a look at are professional associations, things like ESTA, USITT, and others. I know we meet a lot of people in the educational community at USITT who are using that as a great resource. And their websites also offer a lot of information. There's a lot of great training that goes on at some of the trade shows that are geared towards our industry. We've got LDI coming up in October down in Orlando, and there's going to be a lot of things that are available there for you. I may be losing my desktop here, guys. Networking, and mentoring. It's always helpful. There are people in your local community that are going to be willing to work with you, talk with you, mentor you, or just serve as a network group. So one of the things there is to look at those type of resources. Michael or Andrew, you have any other recommendations in terms of ways that you went about learning your profession?
I spent a lot of years doing it.
Yeah, well, that's it. You can't beat hands-on. Formal education is a great thing as well. One of the very first webinar we did, we talked a lot about doing internships, working with people, starting off at entry-level positions, doing volunteer work. So there's a lot of types of things like that are available to you. Okay, so in summary, some of the things you're going to be looking at when you're talking about your venue. What's your budget and or future budget? What are you looking to do today versus what are you looking to do down the road? What are your immediate and ultimate goals? And I think it's key to keep both those things in mind because, I've seen a lot of venues where they had situations where they spent all their budget money today and they weren't able to get the kind of effect that they were looking to get. What are your actual needs in regards to a controller, your needs in regards to a moving light? Again, don't undersell or oversell yourself. Look at there's a lot of options out there. Look at them carefully. Make informed decisions. One of the things that I highly recommend is don't just make a decision based on the fact that it's the only name you know, or it's the one that's been recommended to you the most. Do your own due diligence. Do your research. Also, test drive the things that you're working with, particularly when it's a console. Get it, get involved with it. Make sure you get hands-on with it, things of that nature, so that you can really get yourself up to speed and comfortable with. And also look at what your time frames are like. Are there new technologies that are right on the verge of coming out and you're not making a decision for another 6 months that you might want to include in your decision process? Or do you need to do some things immediately, and you want to know that both the platform and the fixtures that you're choosing are highly stable and are gonna work with that. So if nobody has any other last-minute questions, we'll thank you very much for attending. We're going to be planning some follow-ups on this, so drop us an email. Also, fill out your after-webinar questionnaire to give us recommendations on what topics you'd like to see us cover in the future. And that's really key and critical. This webinar was driven off of a lot of requests that we got from the last one, and we intend to continue to try to do that in the future. So stay involved. Join us for the next event, and we'll make sure that we keep you in the queue in terms of our future planning. Okay, Michael, Andrew, I want to thank you very much for your time here today, and
thank you
for allowing us to tap into your knowledge. Okay, and thanks everyone for attending today. We'll see you all soon.